The email arrived at 11:47 on the night we buried my daughter. I know the exact time because I had been sitting at the kitchen table since we got back from the cemetery, still in my dress shirt, tie loosened, a glass of bourbon in front of me that I hadn't touched. The house felt wrong, too quiet in the way that houses feel wrong when someone who used to fill them is just gone. My daughter had lived 3 states away, but somehow her absence felt loudest here, in the house she grew up in, where her school picture still hung in the hallway, and her old bedroom still smelled faintly like the lavender shampoo she used as a teenager. I wasn't expecting anything. I'd turned off my phone ringer hours ago because the condolence texts had started to feel like a weight I couldn't carry anymore. Every buzz was someone else's grief landing on top of mine. But I'd left my laptop open on the table, and when the notification lit up the screen, I looked at it out of reflex. The sender was my daughter. Her name, her email address. The one I had written birthday cards to, the one I had used to send her pictures of the dog, the one that had gone silent 6 weeks ago when she was admitted to the hospital for the last time. I sat there for a long moment and did not breathe. The subject line said, "Dad, if you're reading this, I need you to do something for me." My daughter's name was Claire. She was 34 years old. She taught middle school science in Asheville, North Carolina, and she had her mother's laugh and her mother's stubbornness and a habit of correcting people's grammar that used to drive her husband absolutely insane. She had been sick for 14 months, a rare autoimmune condition that her doctors in Asheville couldn't get ahead of, that specialist after specialist in Charlotte and then Duke had tried to manage with varying degrees of failure. She had handled it with more grace than I could have. She kept teaching until February. She kept laughing until April. She died on a Tuesday morning in May, and her husband, a man named Philip, was not in the room when it happened. I know because the nurse called me. I was the emergency contact. Claire had listed me first, above Philip, something I hadn't thought much about until that morning when the nurse's voice on the phone was careful and soft and told me they had tried to reach her husband, but his phone went to voicemail. Philip arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after Claire passed. He came in through the main entrance in running clothes, slightly out of breath, like he had jogged from the parking garage. He shook my hand. He said he was sorry. He sat in the chair by the window and looked at his phone. I was 63 years old, and I had buried my wife 8 years before this, and I knew what grief looked like. I knew what it looked like when it knocked the air out of you, and I knew what it looked like when it settled in slow and heavy. What I saw in Philip's face that morning was neither of those things. What I saw was something closer to inconvenience. I told myself I was wrong. I told myself grief takes different shapes in different people. I had liked Philip well enough for the 4 years he and Claire had been married. He was a project manager at a commercial real estate firm, organized and composed, not particularly warm but functional in the way a husband needs to be functional. Claire had seemed happy. That was what I told myself. The funeral was on a Saturday. Philip did not attend. I want to be precise about this because even now, putting it into words, it sounds impossible. My daughter's husband did not come to her funeral. He called me Friday evening and told me he had come down with something, a stomach bug, he thought. And he was so sorry, but he didn't think he should be around people in that state, didn't want to risk anyone else getting sick, and he would visit the grave when he was feeling better. His voice was steady. He sounded like a man cancelling a dentist appointment. I stood in the church the next morning in my black suit, and I watched Claire's colleagues carry her casket down the aisle, and I thought about Philip at home, healthy or sick, on his couch or in his bed, anywhere but here, and I felt something harden inside me that I don't have a better word for than fury. After the service, at the graveside, Claire's closest friend, a woman she'd known since college who had driven up from Columbia just to be there, found me and stood next to me for a while without saying anything. Then she said quietly that she thought I should know something. She said she had tried to call Philip that morning to check on him and his phone had rung twice and gone to voicemail. She said she had also checked his Instagram because she was worried and there was a story posted 40 minutes ago. She showed me her phone. Philip was at a rooftop bar. The skyline behind him was not Asheville. The caption said, "Weekend reset, you only live once." He had used a filter that made everything look golden. I handed her phone back to her. I looked at my daughter's casket being lowered into the ground. I thought about the email I had read the night before, sitting at the kitchen table with the untouched bourbon, and I understood for the first time that Claire had known something I was only beginning to learn. The email was long. She had written it sometime in April, during one of the stretches when she was well enough to sit up, well enough to think clearly, and she had used a service that would hold it and send it automatically if she didn't log in to cancel it within 30 days. She had tested it, she said. She wanted to make sure it worked. She told me she was sorry for doing it this way. She said she had wanted to tell me in person, but every time she tried to find the words, the conversation went somewhere else, and she ran out of energy. And then the window closed. She said she had spent a long time being afraid that she was wrong, that she was reading things into behavior that had innocent explanations, that her illness had made her paranoid or too sensitive or too suspicious of the person she had chosen to spend her life with. She said she stopped being afraid of being wrong in February. In February, she had asked Philip to pick up a prescription from the pharmacy on his way home from work. It was a medication she needed to take with food, a straightforward errand, the kind of thing a husband does without thinking. He forgot. She didn't say anything. The next week, she asked him to call her specialist's office to reschedule an appointment. She wasn't feeling well enough to handle herself. She gave him the number, the reference number, everything he needed. He didn't do it. She had to call from her hospital bed with an IV in her arm. She started paying attention after that. She started looking at things she had told herself not to look at. The credit card statement she handled because Philip had never been organized about finances. The calendar he kept on his phone that synced to their shared account. His work schedule, which she had always accepted without question. What she found was not dramatic in the way that betrayals are dramatic in movies. It was ordinary and small, and somehow worse for that. Charges at restaurants she had never been to. On evenings he said he was working late. A hotel in Greenville on a weekend he said he had a conference in Atlanta. Small transfers out of their joint account into something she couldn't track, steady and consistent, over the course of 8 months. She didn't confront him. She said she was too tired to have the fight and too sick to survive the fallout and too uncertain of what the fallout would even look like. So instead, she started documenting. She forwarded statements to her personal email account. She took screenshots. She wrote down dates and amounts in a notes app and exported it as a PDF. She put everything, every statement, every screenshot, every note, in a folder in a cloud account she created just for this, an account Philip didn't know existed, and she put the login in the email to me. She said, "Dad, I don't know what you'll find. I don't know if any of it means what I think it means. But I know that you're careful and you're fair, and you will look at it honestly. And if I'm right about any of it, I don't want him to walk away from this with everything I worked for." She said, "You were always the person I called when I didn't know what to do. I'm sorry I couldn't call this time." I read that line 3 times, then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. In the morning, I drove to Asheville. I know some people would have called a lawyer first. Maybe that was the smarter move. But I needed to be in her house. I needed to stand in the room she had lived in and understand what I was looking at before I handed it to anyone else. I had the login. I had her address. I had a daughter who had trusted me with something she couldn't carry alone, and I was not going to delegate that. Philip's car was not in the driveway when I arrived. I had a key. Claire had given me a copy years ago, back when they first moved in case of emergencies. I stood on the front step for a moment and thought about whether this counted as an emergency. Then I unlocked the door. The house was tidy. That surprised me somehow. I had expected something, disorder or evidence, or some visible sign of the wrong I was looking for. Instead, it was clean and organized, dishes put away, throw pillows arranged on the couch, a half-finished cup of coffee on the counter that was still faintly warm. Philip had been here recently. I sat down at Claire's desk in the small room she used as a home office, and I opened the cloud account. It took me the better part of 3 hours to go through everything. I am not a forensic accountant. I am a retired civil engineer who spent 30 years building bridges in the Pacific Northwest, and financial documents are not my native language. But I am careful, and I am patient. And Claire knew both of those things, and by early afternoon I understood enough. The transfers were not to a secret account of Philip's own making, at least not directly. They were going to a second LLC that Philip had registered in South Carolina 18 months ago. I wouldn't have found it at all, except that Claire had been thorough. She had found a piece of mail he'd left in a jacket pocket, a statement from a registered agent service, and she had photographed it and included it in the folder. The LLC had a name that meant nothing. It held a bank account and, according to a property record she had also found, a partial ownership stake in a short-term rental property in Greenville. A property that, as far as I could tell from everything in front of me, had been funded in part with money from their joint account. Money Claire had earned. Money that was also, legally, hers. I was still sitting there when I heard the front door open. I want to tell this part accurately, because I think about it sometimes, the way you think about moments that could have gone very differently. I heard the door, and I heard Philip's voice before I saw him. He was on his phone, talking, unhurried, and he was saying something about dinner reservations and whether they should do Saturday or Sunday. He walked into the hallway, and he saw me through the open office door, and his voice stopped mid-sentence. We looked at each other. I closed the laptop. I said, "I'd like to talk to you." He said, "And I will give him this." He recovered quickly. He said he hadn't known I was coming, and he gestured at the phone in his hand, as though that explained anything, and he told whoever he was speaking with that he'd call them back. I did not accuse him of anything in that conversation. I made a decision, standing in my daughter's office with her work still on the walls and her handwriting on the sticky notes around the monitor, that I was going to be very careful. I told him I had come to collect some of Claire's personal items. I told him I wanted to coordinate with him about the estate process, that I knew there were things to be sorted out, and I wanted to make sure we did it properly. I said all of this in the voice I used for decades when I was managing contractors who needed to believe I was calm. He relaxed. I watched him do it. I left 20 minutes later, with Claire's laptop tucked under my arm. I told him she had asked me to keep it, which was close enough to true, and her external hard drive and a small box of things from her desk that I didn't need but wanted a reason to carry. I said goodbye. I told him I'd be in touch about the estate. I drove to a Cracker Barrel on the highway and sat in the parking lot and called a lawyer I had worked with 20 years ago when I was settling my wife's estate. He was semi-retired, but he answered on the second ring, and he listened to the whole thing without interrupting. And at the end he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Send me the login. Don't touch anything else, and don't talk to him again without me on the line." What followed was not quick. I want to be honest about that because these things never are, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. The legal process took 4 months. Philip had his own attorney, a younger man from a firm in Charlotte who was aggressive in the way that lawyers are aggressive when their client is guilty and they know it and they're hoping to run out the clock on the other side's patience. Our attorney was not patient in that way. She was a woman my lawyer brought in who specialized in estate litigation, and she had, as she put it in our first meeting, a low tolerance for people who financially exploit sick spouses. She had seen it before. She had a system. The LLC in South Carolina was the thread that unraveled everything. Once we had established the transfers and the timeline, Philip's attorney tried several different arguments, none of which survived contact with the documentation Claire had assembled. She had been meticulous. She had dated everything. She had preserved emails. She had, at some point in March, sent herself a letter by certified mail with a summary of what she had found and why she believed it. And she had never opened it, and it sat in a drawer at my house now, postmarked and sealed, time-stamped proof of what she knew and when she knew it. The settlement came in September. I cannot share the specifics, and I would not anyway, because that is not the point. What I can tell you is that the short-term rental property in Greenville was sold and the proceeds were accounted for. What I can tell you is that Philip did not walk away from Claire's estate with what he had positioned himself to receive. What I can tell you is that Claire's retirement account, her teacher's pension contributions, her savings, the things she had built carefully over a decade of work, went where she would have wanted them to go. She had a niece, my son's daughter, who is 11 years old and sharp as a tack and wants to be a marine biologist, and there is a college fund now with her name on it. Claire would have liked that. I think about the email a lot. I think about what it took for her to write it. She was sick and she was tired and she was afraid of being wrong, afraid of the confrontation, afraid of what it would cost her in the time she had left to fight a battle on that front. While she was already fighting one in her own body, she chose instead to be precise, to document, to trust that someone else would carry it forward. She trusted me. There's a particular weight to being trusted by someone who is gone. You can't report back to them. You can't tell them what happened, or show them the outcome, or watch their face when they hear it. You just have to do the work and believe that doing it was enough, that somewhere she knows, that somewhere the accounting was worth something. I don't know if I believe in that. I'm 63 years old, and I have buried a wife and a daughter, and I have more questions than answers about what lies on the other side of those losses. But I believe in the work. I believe she trusted the right person. And I believe that what she built in that folder, quietly, carefully, in between rounds of medication and specialist calls and the ordinary exhaustion of being dying, that it mattered. Her niece will go to college. That matters. I was cleaning out the office a few weeks ago and I found one of Claire's old field journals from a science camp she ran in the summers. She took middle schoolers to the Pisgah National Forest every July and let them catalogue insects and collect water samples and learn how to sit still long enough to notice things. The last entry was dated 2 summers ago, before she got sick. At the bottom of the page, in her handwriting, was a note that didn't seem to belong to any particular observation. It just said, "Pay attention. Things leave traces." She always did. I keep coming back to the image of Claire sitting up in bed in April, tired in the way that sick people are tired, not sleepy, but worn all the way through, and writing that email anyway, choosing her words, checking the logic, setting the timer on the send function, and then closing the laptop and going back to whatever the rest of that day held for her. I don't know if she felt relieved after she wrote it, or if it just felt like one more thing she had to get done before she ran out of time. I wish I had asked her more questions when I still could. What I know is this: the outcome of this whole thing didn't happen because of luck. It happened because Claire paid attention when most people would have looked away. She was exhausted and frightened, and she had every reason to spend what energy she had left on something easier. Instead, she looked at the credit card statements. She photographed the piece of mail in his jacket pocket. She created the folder, organized it, dated everything, wrote herself a certified letter she never opened. She did all of that while managing a disease that was taking her apart from the inside. That kind of clear-eyed honesty about a painful situation, the willingness to see things as they actually are, rather than as you need them to be, is harder than it sounds. Most of us resist it. We tell ourselves we're being charitable, when really we're just protecting ourselves from having to act on what we know. Claire didn't do that. She looked, and then she thought, and then she built something that could survive her. That takes a particular kind of courage that I don't think gets named often enough. And then she trusted the right person with it. That part matters too. She didn't panic, and she didn't confront Philip in a moment that could have cost her. She thought carefully about who could carry this forward, and she made a decision. She chose someone she believed was patient and fair, and wouldn't let emotion override the process. I hope I earned that. I tried to. Philip made a different kind of choice, consistently, over a long period of time. He chose comfort over integrity, money over the person who trusted him, self-interest over basic human decency. And those choices accumulated. Every small decision to take a little more, hide a little more, care a little less. It all became a record. Claire understood that things leave traces. Philip apparently didn't believe anyone would look. Someone looked. I'm not a man who believes that the universe runs on some automatic system of reward and punishment. I've seen too much loss to hold on to that kind of certainty. What I do believe is that character compounds. The choices you make when no one is watching, the small everyday decisions about who you're going to be, they add up into something, into a life, into a record, into a folder that a dying woman assembled at 3 in the morning because she had been paying attention. Claire's niece starts 7th grade in the fall. She told me last month that she wants to study marine biology because she read that there are species of jellyfish that researchers still don't fully understand. She said this like it was the most exciting thing she could imagine, that there were still things left to figure out. Claire would have loved that answer. The college fund is there, the work is done, the record stands. That is enough.